ladies and gentlemen, dear listeners, friends of COMETSA all over the world, in South Africa as well. It is a Women's Day in South Africa, so we greet all our beloved women. We say Happy Women's Day to you. And of course, I greet my friend all the way from New York, Dean Foster. Greetings, Dean. I hope you doing well and the weather is good that side.
The weather is beautiful, and I am feeling well and very happy, Sam, that we can be doing this again together. So it's delightful to be here for all good reasons.
Indeed. And I have our guests. We have our guest, Makobe Ramoshaba. She is on holidays in South Africa, but actually she lives in China, and she will tell us a little bit about what's going on in China in terms of culture, but also personal life and professional life. Greetings to you, Makobe. Welcome home.
Thank you. Hi, Sam. Hi, everyone. I look forward to sharing my story, and thanks for having me today.
Beautiful. And then, of course, Makobe, you are joined by your mom. Wow, wonderful. Louisa is sitting next to you, and she's going to be telling us her own experience of the Chinese culture from the family perspective. Greetings, Louisa. Welcome.
Good evening, Sam, and thank you for having us.
Wonderful indeed. This is COMETSA Radio Worldwide. This is our monthly show, Bridging Cultures, and today we are focusing on the Chinese culture. And that's why we have Makobe with us in the studio. We have a very nice lineup of themes that we're going to be addressing. Perhaps let's just welcome everybody, and then, of course, Dean, you and I, we can start. Maybe just remind the people who you are and the type of work you do and why culture. And then, of course, I'll ask the colleagues also to say a few words about themselves, and then we get on to the topic.
Sounds like a great idea, Sam. Good way to go.
Over to you, Dean.
Okay. Well, I guess I should say a few words about myself, why I'm here today. My work for the last 30 years, maybe a little bit more, has been in helping people to understand the differences in cultures as those differences affect their ability to work with each other. So I have been very privileged to work in over 100 countries around the world, and I've worked with Fortune 500 companies, major multinational companies that are working in countries all over the world, and they need this information in order to understand the culture so that they can be more successful in their work with the people that they work with every day. At the end of the day, we like to say that everything depends on your understanding of the culture. And that's been my work, helping people understand cultural differences in order to work more effectively with each other. I am based in New York City, but of course, as you can imagine, given the work that I do, I travel all the time, and as I said, I've been very privileged to work in many, many countries around the world. China, of course, being one of them. China is the second largest world's economy. It certainly is the largest country. It's just been surpassed, actually, in population by India. But for many, many years, up until very recently, it has the world's largest population. It's certainly the major influential culture in all of Asia, and it has immense impact on all of us as it affects the world's economy and the work that we do. No doubt in South Africa, I know that there's a large Chinese presence and always has been historically. And so understanding the Chinese culture is critical in order to work more effectively with them on a day-to-day basis. And I hope that today's discussion will be interesting and informative.
Indeed. And there we go. One of our listeners kick off and just put it in the back of your mind. She's saying could we have amalgamated sufficient understanding of the Chinese culture in approximately 5 years? Sam, surely this is but a taste. We will take a bridge with anyone wanting to speak of our African cultures with such a short time in it. Perhaps there will be a guest participant who will offer clearer direction. Well, she is suggesting the way forward, but let's allow our guests to greet the listeners, and perhaps Makobe, just tell the people who are you from a South African perspective before you can tell us what you are doing in China.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much, and thanks, Dean. It was good to hear about your background. So for myself, yeah, I'll give you some background history. So I was studying in Cape Town actually at Vega, and I got a degree in advertising and marketing. And then I proceeded to work in Cape Town at two advertising agencies. And then I moved to Johannesburg to work at Ogilvy, which is an advertising agency. And then in 2019, there was a friend of mine who was in Shanghai already. We worked together previously in Cape Town, and she was in China, and she told me about this opportunity of teaching English in China. And yeah, she was obviously communicating with me every day. And I was asking her, how was it from a South African's perspective of like having worked in Cape Town and Johannesburg, like culturally, how different is it? And, how are the working conditions? And yeah, she was very open. She communicated to me about how it was to work in China, and she helped me with the process. So yeah, I became interested in it, even though I was working in advertising and I'd never taught before. Like my degree obviously was in marketing, and I was working in a marketing agency, and I really loved it. But I wanted that opportunity to really travel abroad and work abroad. And I think it helped having, it was actually two of my friends who were living in Shanghai and working there, and they told me like their firsthand experience of the challenges that they had, and also like the success that they had, because one of my friends graduated from UCT and he went directly to China, and he was there for like 2 years. And he said he was renewing his work contract for a third year. So that gave me like a good perspective that like working conditions were really good. He was enjoying the lifestyle and he wanted to carry on living there. So yeah, in 2019, I started to apply. I resigned at my job, and my mom was like so helpful, so supportive in terms of getting my paperwork done. And yeah, I was really successful. I got into a good company at EF, English First, and I started teaching there from 2019 until COVID hit. And that was like a very challenging time. But lucky for me, the company that I was working for was like, they said if I stayed in China and didn't go back home, they gave me a laptop and I continued to work online for about a year. So that was really good. They were very supportive. They were very understanding that if we wanted to come home during COVID, we were more than like free to. But if you wanted to stay, of course, they weren't going to pay you if you like left the country. So it was a difficult decision to make at the time in terms of like COVID when it started. And my family was obviously like, no, come back home. And then when COVID was everywhere else, like it was the best decision to actually stay in China. So I stayed at that company for about a year. And then from there, I moved to another company. And then that company subsequently closed down. But then I found another job quite easily where I'm currently at teaching middle school students. I'm still teaching English, but now I'm in Nanjing city. So yeah.
Wow, wow, beautiful. Dean, how fortunate are we to be talking about China and then have a fellow South African who works and lives in China being in the country to join us on our talk?
It's so important, and I'm really happy that Makobe can do this because things change so quickly. And to talk about a culture like China, which is such an ancient culture, it goes back almost 5,000 years, and to understand the impact that those ancient traditions have even today still on people's behaviors, um, and to get a firsthand report from the street, level, actually, from someone who's experiencing it every day is really, really very helpful. Very difficult to talk about a culture that is so critical and so ancient in just a short period of time. But there are important aspects of Chinese culture which I think we can talk about that will give us good insight. Because they can be so challenging and so different from South African culture and Western cultures. So I think there'll be some very good discussion today.
Indeed, indeed. Let's hear it from the mother. Louisa, it must be very hard for a mom to let go of her child into a culture that is foreign, that you yourself doesn't even have any clue on it. Tell us, what gave you that courage, and how was it, and how did you feel when ultimately the answer was yes, she can come over?
Okay, thank you, Sam. I think it's a combination really of, I think in the Bible it says at a certain time we have to let our children go and discover themselves and explore. So with that in mind, yes, I fully supported her to explore the world and to make the world her oyster. And with a few objectives in mind was to have new experiences in life, to meet new people, to be in different environments. Unfortunately, COVID hit and it really did give a different complexion to the whole uh, um, experience, that she ended up being stuck there. And, that was, I mean, for everybody, very difficult. But we still always went back to the objectives. What are the objectives? And we felt that we are still on track in terms of, yes, new exposure, new horizons, meet new people, have new experiences. And so we stuck it through. I must say that in December, I had the opportunity once the restrictions were lifted to go to China. I went there for 3 months, 3 weeks. I was supposed to be there for 4 weeks. And I experienced the culture firsthand. And I must say it was so positive. China is just such a very orderly, well structured, very focused, and all the fears and anxieties that I had about what's happening with my child out there were allayed. I actually came back feeling I think there's a lot that we can learn in terms of the order, the structure, and the focus, and just the good quality of life. Yeah, so
Mm.
it's been a mixed experience. That the sacrifice of years, go out there and explore, but my own evaluation that it's been worthwhile.
Mm. Beautiful, beautiful. And yeah, we'll come back to your experiences. Let's, Dean, from your professional engagement point of view, you have colleagues sitting there and clients working there. Perhaps let's allow you to share with us your perspective from a professional work that you do with so many multinationals that do business with China, but also so many people, for whatever reasons, that travel in and out of China until to the point where we also had a shock of the travel restrictions. But yeah, over to you, Dean, and let's spend this first 1 hour laying the foundation and then preparing ourselves for the quiz in the second segment. Over to you, my friend.
Oh, thank you, Sam. It's wonderful to hear these experiences from Louisa and from Makobe. Louisa, I tip my hat to you as a parent um, at being wise to allow your daughter to find herself and to take on this adventure. And I think that one of the things that we often want to um, impart to our clients, the ones who we do the work with, is that whatever culture they're working with, they have to go into the experience with a sense of adventure, because they are being guests in someone else's home. They are going into a culture that they probably do not understand, um, and I think it's a challenge for all of us, children, parents, clients, people who work in other cultures, to do several things, no matter the culture. It could be China, it could be the US, it could be Singapore, it could be Brazil, it could be Russia, it could be anywhere in the world. We must approach going into working in another culture with a sense of humility, an understanding that we don't understand, and an acceptance to learn. And I think just taking that position is something that is often difficult to do. Because I think as all humans, we like to fill in the absence of information with our own impressions. And until we get new information, we have false understanding. So we may have read a few things about China, or we may have spoken to someone who had been to China. And it forms impressions and ideas in our mind. And in the absence of real fact, we often then assume that Chinese culture is the way it was described to me or the way I read about it. But that may not be the fact. And so one of the things that we always do in the work that we do with our clients is to provide the facts, but recognize and help them to recognize the process of letting go of their expectations, letting go of the stereotypes that they may have formed incorrectly from limited or incorrect information from other people, and then to listen to the facts and to learn about them. And I think it's great today that Makobe, you can bring some of those facts to us, and I hope that I can share some as well. Sam, to your question, one of the things I think that is often so challenging for our clients who are working in China, and also not only working in China, but working with China. They may not be in China, but in a global world today with technology, we're always working with people in other cultures, even if we are not in that culture with them. And one of the things I think that is challenging for all of our clients working in and with Chinese culture is the fact that there is a communication style that can often be very different from the communication style of our own culture. When I work, for example, with many Western cultures, there is English speakers as well as Europeans from the continent. There is a sense of speaking with directness and with an expectation that I will use words to be as clear as possible and to say what needs to be said, even if what needs to be said is not necessarily pleasant or easy to hear. But the Chinese experience historically for so many thousands of years was different. Obviously, a different history, the other side of the world, at a time when the world was not connected the way it is today. And so Chinese culture developed very independently, certainly from Western cultures. And therefore, the communication style in China is often very different. And I think that presents one of the challenges that a lot of our clients have struggled with. And what I'm referring to here is that in the Chinese history, very influenced by Chinese philosophy, Chinese thinkers such as Confucius, such as Lao Tzu, Buddha, and other thinkers, it's far more important to communicate in ways that maintain harmony and ease of communication. That is more important than saying what may actually need to be said. And so, if I were to ask my Chinese colleague, for example, can you tell me, please, what you think of these ideas that we've been discussing? The answer that I might get is more about maintaining harmony than it is about giving me his true feelings. So he might say something like, Well, I think we're doing very, very well with these ideas, and we're on the right track. But in fact, he may not feel that way. But in time, we might get to how he truly feels, but not at the beginning. And so the first order of business is to maintain harmony and respect for each other, even if it means not saying everything that needs to be said. And this is a difference in expectations that can get two cultures into trouble with each other, because the Chinese culture is looking to maintain harmony first and then get to the facts later. And the Western culture is looking to get to the facts now, and then when we solve the problem, we can have a harmonious relationship. So we're speaking in two different ways. And I think one of the things I'd like to really emphasize here is that this difference in communication style is the result of the history and the philosophy that goes back thousands of years. So these things do not disappear so quickly. There is the idea of maintaining harmony in all human relationships. Very, very important. And one way that you maintain harmony is how you speak with each other and how you constantly show respect for the other person. And one of the ways you show respect for the other person is by honoring what we say in Chinese. We call it mianzi. It's face. It translates into the English word face. So it's very important to maintain the face of the other person that you're speaking with, and the other person will do everything they can to maintain your face. That means you make them look good in the eyes of others. If we're all sitting around a table, my job is to make my Chinese colleagues look very, very good in the eyes of their other Chinese colleagues at the table. I should not say anything that makes that person look bad or makes them look in any way like they are doing something wrong. And they will do the same for me. So always make face, never break face, and always communicate with the intent of maintaining harmony first. The facts will come out later, but maintaining harmony is very, very important.
Wow.
And I think that there are some things about this that are similar in many, it reflects many South African traditions as well, to some degree, but I think the difference is a matter of degrees, because in China, this is absolutely fundamental.
Wow. Let's hear Makobe's reflection on what you have just said from a practical experience since 2019 being there, Makobe.
Oh, yes, yes. Thanks, Sam. Wow, Dean. I think maybe my interpretation may be not different, but obviously not from a studying them perspective. But I like how you have kind of defined a lot of the things I have been experiencing. I even wrote down a lot of what you said about maintaining that harmony and respect. And I think that's one thing definitely that I have experienced. Maybe I would have viewed it in a different way of them not wanting to like tell me the truth. Like if I were to ask feedback on, oh, I just did a lesson, how was my lesson? They would maybe choose their words very carefully, not wanting to obviously offend me or wanting to obviously give me feedback, but being very respectful, as you were to say, like wanting to give me suggestions and be criticized or be critical, but yeah, still having that respect. So I think I definitely agree with that what you said, and I also wrote down. I like what you said about understanding that we don't understand. I think before I went to China, I did a lot of research in terms of asking people, like you said, people's experiences, online reviews, YouTube videos of people that have traveled to the country or even lived there, and asked them or read what their experience was in terms of also being a black person, the racial issues, how they treat black people. Is it as bad as people say? But I think one thing you also touched on is people's experiences will be different, and what you may read or what you may hear about is not exactly how things always are. And I think living there has really showed me that we interpret things very differently, and especially when it comes to China, I think they have quite a bad reputation of how they treat people, how they are perceived to the world, and there are things that they're really doing correctly, and that's why so many of my friends have been there for so many years. But I like how you said about accepting, and that's one thing I accepted, is as much as I asked people about their experiences, I had to accept that I will have my own experience and my own interpretation of everything that happens to me. And even the racist things that some people may say was racial for them weren't necessarily that racial for me. I saw it as them being curious about the texture of my hair, that I have braids and it's something they haven't seen. My hair could be purple tomorrow or red the next day. And obviously for them, that's very different. So from what people told me, I was like, okay, I have to form my own opinions and I have to still have an open mind and still know like what my mom said, what was my objective, what am I focusing on, what are my goals that I want to achieve by going to a different country, and also understanding that this isn't a Western country, like this is a completely different country. The government system plays a role in how the country is, and it's really made me grow within myself of understanding how different things are, and different doesn't mean wrong, different doesn't mean bad, like different just means it's different, and accepting that this is all they know. And I think it's been really great. But culturally, it was challenging, I think, at first, especially when you talk about that harmony and them just wanting to be polite. I think one thing I appreciate about Western culture, especially South Africa, people will tell you, negative things, or they'll tell you like it is. And that's sometimes kind of comforting because you want to know if you're doing something wrong, or you want to know like the truth sometimes. And I think maybe they are very, yeah, very political, very, sometimes not very open minded, and they would maybe not express their full truth in a way to save the relationship, or in a way to, as work colleagues, obviously just keep things very neutral. And sometimes the Western culture were very raw, and I think maybe I missed that. But yeah, it's been amazing, and it's been the cultural things I've learned to adjust, that what, these people are different, and different is beautiful. It's not anything bad.
Right, right. That's wonderful experiences, Makobe. It's sometimes it can be difficult. We have a saying, "No pain, no gain." You have to experience the differences, and sometimes the reaction that we have to experiencing a cultural difference is I don't understand. I'm confused. It's not making sense. But over time, we learn, and and if we can speak with people who can give us the correct information, then we can learn more quickly and have less pain. And certainly for the clients that we've worked with, many multinational companies, the sooner they can get an accurate understanding of the culture, the less pain they will have, the less costs they will have, the less misunderstandings they will have. And all of that for big companies translates into profits and losses. So it becomes absolutely critical if we're doing work in another country to understand things clearly and objectively. Um, but from your perspective, to hear you talk about, I was very curious to hear you talk about the Chinese reaction to the racial differences, and it reminded me. Here I am, a white man from New York City. It reminded me of the first time that I was in Shanghai, going back into the early '90s, before Shanghai even looked the way it looked now. I remember standing on the Bund and looking across the river and looking at Pudong, and it was all farmland. There weren't even any buildings at the time. And I remember being able to walk along the riverfront, and people would come up to me and they would touch me, and they would touch my hair as well, because it was blonde. It had a blonde look to it in those days. Now it's silver, of course, but in those days, and they hadn't seen too many people with blonde hair. And then they insisted that they wanted to speak with me, and they would say things like, "Do you speak English? Do you speak English?" Because all of them were learning English in school at the time, but there were very few English speakers who were in Shanghai. And then when I would say a few words to them in English and they would say a few words back to me, they wanted to practice their English. That's why they wanted to speak with me. And um, and they just never had the chance to meet very many Westerners. So they were very curious. And their behavior was not to insult me or to make me feel inferior, but rather their behavior was to find out more about me. And once we did get into a little bit of a conversation, always in English because my Mandarin was very bad at the time, we would talk about things in a very harmonious kind of way. Always be the avoiding of anything that was unpleasant to speak about. And everything was always said with a laugh or a giggle, to imply, let's keep this light and happy. Let's not talk about things that can be difficult, because let's first maintain our harmonious relationships. And I think it is important in China to understand not only is this critical and part of the DNA of the culture, because of the need for harmonious relationships and always maintaining the face of the other person. But the political realities over the many centuries has often made people very, very skeptical to say what is truly on their mind, because they never knew who they were speaking to. And it wasn't that many years ago where you could get in serious trouble with the authorities because someone that you were speaking with may have reported something that you had said that did not meet with the approval of the authorities. And so engaging in conversations that force the other person to reveal their true feelings about the politics or their true feelings about the government, or government policies that it may affect them, this kind of conversation can be very difficult. And oftentimes your Chinese colleagues will shy away from talking about that. I also remember one time in Shanghai speaking to a Chinese fellow who I was just meeting on the street in one of these street conversations that we would have so easily. And I remember he was asking me all sorts of questions about life in America, and I asked him some questions about life in China. And while he expected me to share many answers for him about his many questions, he was not willing to share his answers to my questions about China. And it wasn't because he didn't want to be fair. It was because it was very difficult for him, and probably it could have been dangerous for him. So he avoided answering my questions. And I remember one question I asked him at the time was, we were talking about our families, and I said, "How many children do you have?" And he got very quiet. And he said, "Well, I have one boy, and also we have a girl, but she lives with us and her mother." And I found that very confusing because I didn't quite understand the family relationship, if that were the case. But I did have a strong sense that he did not want to continue this conversation. And then I realized, of course, what I had done. Inadvertently, not intentionally, I had asked him to talk about the fact that he actually had more than one child at a time when in China it was very. It wasn't really. It wasn't illegal, but it was different. You would have to pay a penalty to the authorities if you had more than one child. And revealing this to me put him in a dangerous situation. So he was very oblique about his response. And of course, afterwards, I realized the mistake that I had made. But it's so easy to make these mistakes when we cross cultures because we can only be ourselves. Hopefully, we can be ourselves in an enlightened way, but still, that's all we can be.
Then Makobe is teaching the young Chinese or the children, let me put that way, English. Perhaps it will be very interesting to find out, that is her professional work. And how does culture filter into your work, Makobe? I'm very interested in that. And then maybe then, in terms of negotiating business deals, how does this culture of preserving harmony first before you bring facts, how is that managed from a Western point of view or any other non-Chinese point of view? Because ultimately, I guess there has to be an alignment. And how does one do that? Perhaps let's start with Makobe in terms of her being a teacher in the class and having to navigate culture as she's teaching English.
Okay, thanks, Sam. Yeah, I think very good question. I also thought that the cultural kind of barriers and the cultural differences wouldn't play a role in me being a teacher because, of course, you're just there to teach English and, the political situation and just the, what you can and cannot speak about. I thought that that wouldn't affect me. It was only up until last year where I started working at a new school and I was teaching middle school students. And of course, that's students from like their age 13 to like 14, 15, so they're like mini adults, that are adolescence age where they're very inquisitive. They want to ask you questions about what country are you from. And one student actually asked me kind of a very political question about what do you think about policies in China or something what do you think about um, America and some other country? I don't know, it was something very political, but I don't think I said the right answer, and I wasn't aware that I was kind of like speaking about a political situation. I think it was when Russia was in war, when the war started with Russia and Ukraine, and he asked me like what was my views on the war in Russia and Ukraine, and I was like, well, I don't really care about that because I'm South African. And, I tried to dismiss the line of questioning in terms of like, just, I don't care about that. I'm a teacher, I'm here to teach. And subsequently, that wasn't taken very well. He told another teacher that, I don't care about the views of China and the country. And I kind of not got in trouble, but it became a bit of an issue. My boss then called me into her office and was like, okay, why are you speaking about politics, in the classroom? That's not allowed. And I'm like, there wasn't actually a contract where it says it's not allowed to speak about politics, but obviously it's just like known that you're not allowed to speak about it. But then obviously I explained to her the situation that no, one of the students actually asked me about what my views were about the political situation and China's involvement or something like that. I explained to her, and yeah, I explained to her that I just tried to dismiss it by saying that I'm South African, I don't care about American and Chinese politics. And he was like, what, you don't care about our country? They're very patriarchal, like they're very proud. And I didn't realize that by saying that he was trying to gauge where I stand. So
That's right.
yeah,
That's
it
right.
made me really upset at the time. I was very upset because of course like I'd been there like 3 years by that time. I'm learning some Mandarin. I love the country. I love the kids, but it made me really upset that like they would view me in that way, or that they were still trying to gauge my alliance. And maybe because I was working with older kids who were curious, I wasn't aware of how my comments could have been taken in a different way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Makobe, can I ask, how old was the child? Who?
The child it was a boy. I remember him, very inquisitive boy. He is in grade 7, so I believe that's like 13 actually. 13, yeah, going to 14.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. I've heard different versions of this kind of situation, even with the clients and companies that we've worked with, where casual conversations that the Westerner could expect to have suddenly in China become very uncomfortable, and
Yeah. Mm.
and 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 they realize that they maybe have said something that they shouldn't have said, or um, or were unable to have a conversation about things that in the West they could easily expect to have,
Mm.
and when it comes to working to Sam, to your question about how we work and negotiate with each other and do business with each other, this issue comes up again and again, because even more so because between adults, um, you have to understand that in China, adults are all engaged in one way or another in some capacity with the government. If you're not speaking directly to someone who plays some role in the government, you are definitely still speaking with someone who speaks to someone who has a role in the government, in some capacity.
Mm.
So everyone is careful, and
Mm.
we can have lots of different feelings about this situation, from a Western perspective, certainly from a United States perspective, where there is a great emphasis on freedom of speech. Um, this is something that people make judgments about. They say, well, this is wrong. This is not the way people should have to be with each other, etc. But it's very difficult to make those kinds of judgments when working with another culture. However you feel about it is one thing. The fact is, you have to work with these people, and don't judge them and don't judge the situation until you fully understand it. In many cases, it may not be what the Chinese person who you're speaking with likes either, but nevertheless, they have to live with the consequences of it.
So is it therefore helpful, or is it a practice that those multinationals that are operating in China, and there are many of them from all over the world, is it helpful to have more Chinese local management staff or staff in general looking after their business interests, or what is the situation?
Well, I think it's a multifaceted approach. I think there are lots of things that need to be done in order to be successful in this kind of a circumstance. Yes, understand the reality that you're faced with. Have, yes, local Chinese operating the office or the project or the staff if you can. And in fact, you probably will have to do that because the Chinese are going to be more comfortable working with someone who they can communicate with more easily than with a Westerner. And I think put a lot of your energy, particularly at the beginning of your relationship, into building a trustworthy relationship with a key individual who can tell you what's really going on. And it's going to be hard to find that kind of a person because everyone has to be careful in China about what they say and to whom they speak, especially when speaking to foreigners. And especially when speaking to foreigners, because the government will notice that you're speaking with someone who's a foreigner. And they will want to know, what are you saying? What are they saying? What is the conversation about? So,
Dean, is it, sorry for I just want us to have a,
yeah.
But that's in terms of culture, that's defaulting more so into politics of doing business in China, right? And being as a culture expert, how do you define that? Because it looks like there could be politics of doing business, which is not necessarily culture, or am I wrong?
Well, politics is a result of culture, and there are lots of reasons historically why China developed the way it did and has this situation. Um, but the reality is that this is the situation we have, and I think there are ways to manage it. You don't want to speak about politics. You don't want to put your Chinese colleague in the position of having to do that. If they are putting you in a position of having to do that, they're probably seeking information for some reason, and I would be suspect about what those reasons might be. So you need to be very clever. You need to answer in ways that do not endanger them, but also do not endanger yourself. And sometimes it's very difficult because Makobe, it sounded like your situation with that young student was uncomfortable because no matter what you did, you could be interpreted as having said and done something wrong.
But it sounds like it was a good opportunity for her because it conscientized her, right, Makobe?
Yes. I think previously before that incident, I took a lot of things maybe for granted, and I wasn't very vocal, obviously, about things. But I think it really made me more aware that okay, I need to be very cautious, especially with the older students. Obviously, the young ones are very innocent and playful, but with the
Right.
older ones, they're at that age when themselves are questioning things that I can definitely not answer. Even maybe their parents wouldn't even talk to them about. So
Mm,
yeah, it was a
mm,
lesson for me.
That's right. That's right.
yeah, yeah.
Mm, mm.
Wow, this is quite. Now on the leisure side, I mean we've been speaking a little bit more about business, but on the leisure side, what has been the experience? And maybe Louisa, you went there on holidays. I don't think you did a lot of business while you were there. How did you experience culture on a leisure side in the public, traveling, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, okay. I think, thank you, Sam. What I've already stated is I was highly impressed, having been very anxious about my daughter out there, foreign country, all the negative things I've heard. Do they eat people or whatever? I mean, somebody made an outrageous statement like that, but it was a wonderful experience, really, in terms of the order, things work, especially when you've come from load shedding. Things work. There are trains. It was just a beautiful experience. I must say the one thing that did stand out, and on the culture side, is and Dean, what Dean has said maybe adds light to when Makobe stays in an apartment block on the 24th floor of the building, beautiful apartment block, and every time we went up and down, if we were in the lift and it opened, or the Chinese wouldn't go in, if we were there, they would go out. If they were there, that was quite a culture shock for me.
She was very shocked.
But then I must say that it was not aggressive, it was not overt. I don't know what, there was no aggression. So they would go out. If you went in, they would go out. But it's crime free, and I'm worried about my daughter living. There's no aggression, nobody attacks you. So the message they send by coming out of the lift when you are there, not going in if you are there, but nobody will attack you, and they leave you with the homework of, what do you think? But otherwise, a beautiful country. I enjoyed it. The shopping, very affordable, beautiful, clean.
But she didn't like the food. So I think leisure-wise, my mom struggled with the food. I took her to KFC. She said the KFC does not taste the same. I took her to McDonald's. She said McDonald's doesn't taste the same. She really struggled with that. And people were taking photos of us, like in my neighborhood, as she mentioned, like in the apartment block, and it made her feel very uncomfortable. And like that is something that I've become so like accustomed to. Like they'll stare, maybe just be curious. Now there's two black people, and there's an older black person, and they look the same. Like, are they related? Like, but as she said, it's not aggressive. It's more curious, and they would
So
never.
it's more curiosity than anything else, right?
Yes, yeah, yeah, more curiosity than anything.
Yeah. And if I'm
That's
to add, but that, for us, and I think Makobe said this, we always stuck to what is your objective for going there? We're not going there to change the country. We're going there to look, to listen, and to learn. And so you don't go there like, oh, you just observe and they let you exist. So very interesting. And if you know why you are there and you
Mm.
accomplish your objective,
And
you
and
would
there
not.
is a big need because they need English teachers. So you're providing an essential service to the country's
Absolutely.
program of education. Dean?
Mm.
Absolutely.
Even sorry to interrupt. As Dean was saying that he was standing in Shanghai on the buns, and I know the lookout point you're talking about in Pudong, and that is a very popular tourist destination. And you were talking about how a Chinese came up to you, and he wanted to practice his English. It's still very much like that. I very often when I'm traveling in Shanghai, they're a bit more confident in Shanghai, and they used to foreigners, but they will want to talk to you in English and speak to you and like kind of show off that they're more fluent in English, and they want to like, oh, they've traveled, they want to show you that they're more open-minded. So I just, yeah, that what Dean said resonated with me because it's happened to me so often. Like the little kids, they want to come talk to you because it's exciting for them. So I think
Mm.
that whole racial thing, for me, I try to look at it in a different aspect, in a different way of they're more curious and they're more like want to interact with something different. That's how I kind of view
Mm.
it.
Dean, this must be
yes.
very interesting research topic in terms of it's the oldest culture, but in terms of the program they've undertook of economic integration or doing business with the world, and English becoming one of the spoke of the business language. Will we be right to say in that context China is young?
China is amazing, actually. Yes, what they've managed to do is the China of today is extremely young. And in the last, when you think about what's happened in the last 20 years, um, what the Chinese government has done is taken a massive country out of poverty. There was a significant amount of poverty going back 20, 30 years, and that poverty existed for centuries, due in part to Western exploitation for many of
Mm,
those centuries. And prior to that, it was simply a vast feudal system, a dynastic system, with the emperor and the feudal lords throughout the country. And the people never benefited from the government, and the people really were very poor and very agrarian. And that was China for 90% of its history. And then in just the last 20 years, this economic, um, I would I would call it a miracle if it was something that we couldn't understand, but we can understand it because it was very consciously done. And it was an incredible feat, an incredible human feat. I think more people were lifted out of poverty, millions and millions and millions of people, and the country was transformed literally overnight into the world's second most powerful economy. That's a staggering achievement, and we could say that there may have been significant price to pay for that achievement. Certainly, many Westerners view um, the government as too authoritarian and too much in control, and that people are fearful of being able to do things on their own, lack of freedom of expression, lack of freedom of for for many years, you couldn't even travel within China.
Mm.
But all of that but that certainly has changed. But however we judge it, and there are certainly things that are probably we would judge as not the way we would do it. Nevertheless, this was an incredible achievement, and they did do it this way. And so millions and millions of people have been lifted out of poverty, and China has opened its doors to the world, and the world has opened its doors to China. Never before in history has that happened.
To a point of many countries or many people in the world wanting to learn the what do you call the language, Mandarin?
Mandarin. Well, we have to understand, again, Mandarin is the spoken language of the region in the north where the capital is, Beijing. And throughout China, there are many other languages that are spoken. And in Shanghai, for example, we speak a certain form of Shanghainese. In Zhejiang, we're speaking Sichuanese. And there's over 30 different languages that are spoken. Northern speakers that are speaking Mandarin cannot be understood by southern speakers in Hong Kong because they're speaking Cantonese Chinese, which is completely different from Mandarin. However, in order to unify the country, one of the things the Chinese government has done is made the teaching of Mandarin mandatory in all the schools. So the official language of the country is Mandarin, even though for the majority of people in China, their first spoken language at home is not Mandarin. And then in addition to Mandarin, then the government also mandated that English be taught in all the schools. So most Chinese students are speaking at least 3 languages. They're speaking their local language that they grew up with, plus they learned Mandarin, plus they learned English. And I'm guessing also, Makobe, from your experience, are they teaching English as a spoken skill, or are they teaching English as a reading and writing skill?
Yes, so at most schools, they're teaching it as a spoken skill and a reading and writing skill. Mine is an international school. So obviously at the different levels, your public school would teach maybe basic reading, writing, and speaking. And then international school, it just gets more advanced. But yeah, they teach all 4 of the skills: reading, writing, speaking, and listening, of course.
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm looking at time. We have 3 minutes before we transition into the second segment. But this has been very informative, and I like the fact that we have Makobe sharing with us on the ground experience. Perhaps, how ready is Louisa in terms of the quiz in the second segment? 2 minutes to go.
With Makobe's help, I suppose I'll survive.
Should we take
Louisa,
Louisa,
you have. I'm about to say, Louisa, you have already survived marvelously. Do not worry about that.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful indeed. Thank you so much for that information. It was just opportunistic for us by bringing Makobe in as a speaking partner, but she's giving us a model. Dean, it's always very nice to find somebody that is living that culture, who is that culture, or is not coming from that culture.
Yes, and I'm just so pleased to be able to hear from Makobe from her experiences right down on the street level, day to day.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Beautiful. Stay in the studio, as we say. We take a break, and we will be back just under 5 minutes with the second segment, and we're going to be looking at the culture quiz, just to give us a taste of how it could be being in China for the first time. Just stay in the studio, colleagues and listeners.